Jesus Christ personally chose Judas Iscariot to join the ranks of the 12 disciples. Still, this same individual would go on to betray the Son of God, accepting payment equivalent to what a slave might cost. This goes beyond being just another tale from the Bible. What we're looking at here is a gripping psychological drama involving betrayal, avarice, and faith that crumbled, ultimately altering the trajectory of human history forever. Starting from his earliest experiences as a follower of Jesus, bearing witness to miracles with his own eyes, all the way to that fateful moment when he guided armed men to seize his teacher, we are going to explore each and every aspect of how Judas transformed from a faithful disciple into history's most notorious traitor. The insights you are about to gain regarding his actual reasons and those final hours will fundamentally alter your perception of this crucial character within Christianity. Now, before we proceed further, if this is your first time here on this channel, please consider clicking that like button and don't forget to subscribe if you have not done so yet. When you support us, it enables us to keep producing content like this for all of you. Additionally, please share with us your current location and what the time is where you are. We are creating a worldwide community right here. So then, with no more delay, shall we begin? A gesture of affection that reverberates across the ages. Within the Garden of Gethsemane, darkness and light play among olive trees that have stood for generations. Through the pale moonlight, a silhouette draws near, accompanied by a gathering of armed soldiers and guards from the temple. The flames from their torches flicker and dance, resembling fallen stars brought down to earth. This figure moves closer, his features both recognizable and somehow foreign at once. A kiss is placed upon the face of the rabbi who hails from Nazareth. Time itself seems to pause in this instant. That kiss lingers in the atmosphere, hanging there like a question formed from pure treachery. The entire world surrounding them appears to hold its breath in anticipation. The disciples begin to disperse in panic. The guards advance steadily. And there, in that infinitesimal space, separating one heartbeat from the next, the course of history turns upon the hinge of this single act. This kiss comes from Judas Iscariot. His very name bears the burden of 2 millennia worth of whispered condemnations. Each generation that has followed has pondered the mystery of this individual who journeyed alongside Jesus for 3 full years, only to surrender him in exchange for 30 silver pieces. What forces pushed him toward this critical juncture? What thoughts must have raced through his consciousness as his lips made contact with the face of the one he addressed as teacher? To truly grasp the meaning of this kiss, we need to step backward in time. We must go back beyond that garden, past the table where they shared their Last Supper, further back than the dusty pathways of Galilee. We must immerse ourselves in the environment that molded Judas Iscariot. The circumstances that eventually made betrayal appear to be his sole remaining option. Our narrative does not commence with Judas himself, but rather with the territory that gave him birth. First-century Judea throbs with underlying conflict and stress. Eagles bearing Roman insignia rest atop Jewish houses of worship. Foreign deities demand reverence from the people whom God chose as his own. The burden of living under occupation weighs heavily upon each conversation, every uttered prayer, each dream of breaking free. Here, within this high-pressure environment where politics and religious devotion collide, a young individual named Judas discovers how to move between different worlds. Growing up, he absorbs tales of monarchs from ancient times who succeeded in expelling foreign invaders. He observes Roman military forces marching through the streets of his community. He listens carefully as rabbis engage in debates regarding whether God has turned his back on his chosen people or whether salvation lies just beyond the horizon of tomorrow's dawn. Judas matures into a person suspended between optimism and hopelessness. His heart pulses with rebellious energy. His intellect constantly calculates what chances a revolution might have. Upon encountering an itinerant teacher from Nazareth, something awakens deep inside him. Could it be that this Jesus possesses the answer to achieving freedom? Perhaps walking in his footsteps will ultimately lead to Israel's restoration. His journey commences with genuine belief. Judas becomes part of a group of 11 other individuals who are convinced they have discovered something truly exceptional in this carpenter's offspring. Together they traverse dusty roads. They break bread together and exchange stories. They observe phenomena that cannot be readily explained. Water undergoes transformation into wine. Violent storms grow calm at the utterance of a single word. Those who have died return from their eternal slumber. However, somewhere during this journey, the vision Judas holds begins to grow unclear. The kingdom Jesus describes does not align with the kingdom Judas has imagined in his mind. Rather than witnessing armies assembling for battle, Jesus speaks about offering the other cheek when struck. Instead of summoning fire from the heavens above, Jesus pronounces blessings upon those in mourning. The uprising Judas anticipates fails to materialize. Disillusionment takes root and flourishes like a seed planted in parched earth. Questions begin to accumulate during the silent hours of contemplation. For what reason does Jesus refrain from claiming the throne that should be his? Why does he communicate through puzzling riddles when straightforward action would prove more effective? Why does he invest precious time with tax collectors and those considered sinners when righteous individuals require liberation? The final week approaches with the ominous quality of an approaching tempest. Jesus sets his face with determination toward Jerusalem. Those following him sense that something significant is building, something that will either see their teacher crowned as monarch or completely destroy all they have constructed together. Judas observes carefully. He performs his calculations. He arrives at his decision. In that upper room, Jesus assumes the role of a servant and washes feet. He speaks of betrayal as though it was something unavoidable, something destined to occur. He tears bread apart and distributes wine, fashioning symbols that will endure longer than mighty empires. One after another, the disciples pose the question, "Is it I?" The inquiry floats through the air with the quality of burning incense. Judas asks this question as well. The words carry a peculiar taste upon his tongue. In the depths of his being, he already possesses the answer. The choice has already been made. Events have been set in motion. That kiss awaits him in the garden, like an inescapable fate. This marks the true beginning of our account. Not with the kiss as such, but with the lengthy road that brought him to that point. The path that meanders through the complex political landscape of ancient Palestine, cutting through the heart of an individual torn between faithfulness and personal conviction, through the enigma of human free will, intersecting with divine intention. That kiss in Gethsemane continues to echo through the corridors of time because it embodies something that transcends any single era. It represents that precise moment when bonds of friendship dissolve into betrayal, when hope undergoes transformation into bitter disappointment, when the distance between our expectations and actual reality becomes far too vast to span. Judas Iscariot occupies a position at the intersection point of history, grasping 30 pieces of silver in one hand while bearing the weight of eternity itself in the other. His story is preparing to reveal itself. Layer upon layer, comparable to flower petals gradually opening to reveal what lies concealed at the center. The garden stands waiting. The kiss draws nearer. And somewhere in those shadows that exist between faith and uncertainty, between loyalty and utter despair, an individual named Judas advances toward the moment that will establish his identity for all time to come. The world that existed before Judas. The sun ascends over Judea, resembling a fist clenched tight in an act of defiance. Standards bearing Roman symbols cast elongated shadows across the temple in Jerusalem. Within the marketplace, merchants engage in haggling using 3 different languages, while soldiers maintain their watchful presence from the corners. This represents the world into which Judas Iscariot enters existence. A world where every breath carries the taste of foreign occupation, and every prayer contains whispered longings for freedom. The legions commanded by Pompey conquered Jerusalem 6 decades prior to Judas, drawing his initial breath. The Romans arrived, making promises of peace, yet their version of peace feels comparable to a boot pressed firmly against the throat of an entire nation. They permit the Jewish people to offer worship to their God, who cannot be seen, but only under conditions set by Rome. The high priest fulfills his duties at the pleasure of Caesar. The treasury of the temple channels its wealth toward the coffers of Rome. Within this crucible of bitter resentment, Jewish identity undergoes transformation into something possessing greater sharpness than ever before. The descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob come to discover that enduring hardship has a unique way of distilling faith to its essence. They recall the narratives their grandparents shared with them. They recite the promises God extended to David. They tally the years that have passed since the prophecies of Daniel were given, and they wonder whether the era of restoration might be drawing close. Various religious factions arise like distinct currents flowing within the same river. The Pharisees construct protective barriers of law surrounding the law itself, holding the belief that flawless obedience will summon divine deliverance. The Sadducees establish peaceful relations with those holding power, selecting collaboration rather than confrontation. The Essenes withdraw to desert regions, waiting patiently for God to purify the world through fire. And then we have the Zealots. These are the individuals who sharpen their swords in hidden locations. They maintain the belief that God provides assistance to those who take initiative to help themselves. They nurture dreams of another Judas, Judas Maccabeus, who succeeded in driving out Syrian oppressors 200 years earlier. They speak in hushed tones about the arrival of an anointed individual, a Messiah figure who will restore the kingdom to Israel. The atmosphere of first-century Palestine practically crackles with anticipation regarding the Messiah. Those who preach in the streets proclaim that the kingdom draws near. Prophets arise from wilderness regions, calling the people to repentance. Workers of wonders attract crowds through signs and miraculous acts. Rome demonstrates tolerance toward these movements up until the point they pose threats to the peace, at which time they are crushed through methodical brutality. Into this environment steps a young individual named Judas. His family name, Iscariot, might connect him to the Sicarii, those dagger-wielding men who engage in urban warfare against those who collaborate with Rome. Or perhaps it merely identifies him as an individual from Kerioth, a settlement located in the southern region of Judah. Regardless of its origin, he bears the burden of his people's aspirations and frustrations. The economic conditions throughout Judea shape character with the same certainty that mountains shape patterns of weather. Small-scale farmers find themselves struggling beneath the weight of crushing tax obligations. Roman tax collectors extract every denarius they possibly can from the population. The temple system makes demands for tithes and various offerings. Common families discover themselves trapped between these competing demands upon their limited resources. Trade routes crisscross the entire region, like arteries transporting the very lifeblood of empire. Merchant caravans transport silk originating from China and aromatic spices from India. Roman engineering achievements connect far-flung provinces through roads that will continue to exist long after the empire itself has fallen. Yet the majority of Jewish people feel shut out from this prosperity. They remain mere observers to wealth that flows through their territory but never comes to rest in their own hands. Religious festivals function as pressure release mechanisms for a population existing under perpetual stress. The Passover celebration causes Jerusalem's population to swell from 50,000 inhabitants to more than 200,000. Pilgrims stream in from every corner of the known world. They arrive to commemorate liberation from Egypt and to offer prayers for liberation from Rome. The temple towers over Jerusalem, comparable to a mountain constructed of white stone and precious gold. Herod the Great undertook its reconstruction to rival any architectural achievement throughout the empire. Yet this impressive structure stands as a symbol representing compromise. Funding from Roman sources financed its construction. Roman approval granted permission for its completion. Even the dwelling place of God bears the unmistakable fingerprints of foreign authority. Throughout the villages that surround Jerusalem, daily life moves according to rhythms more ancient than any empire. Farmers plant their crops and bring in harvests, following seasonal patterns their ancestors have recognized for 1,000 years. Women draw water from wells that Abraham himself might have known. Children engage in games that echo backward to the era of ancient kings. But even here, in these places seemingly untouched by time, the burden of occupation presses downward with relentless force. Tax collectors make their appearances at harvest time. Young men vanish, conscripted into Roman auxiliary military units. Families experience division between those who actively resist and those who choose to accommodate. The personal becomes inseparable from the political. The spiritual dimension becomes revolutionary in nature. Synagogues fulfill roles that extend beyond simple places of worship. They operate as community gathering places, educational institutions, and judicial courts. Here, the law handed down by Moses competes directly with the law proclaimed by Caesar. Scribes and teachers engage in debates concerning not merely theology, but the very question of survival. How does a people succeed in maintaining their distinct identity while existing under foreign domination? The written word assumes particular importance within this context. Scrolls containing the Torah become treasures valued more highly than gold itself. The capability to read and properly interpret Scripture marks an individual as deserving of respect. Knowledge of the law confers both spiritual authority and practical influence. Greek culture continues exerting influence upon Jewish life, even many decades following the Maccabean revolt. The gymnasium continues attracting young men who seek personal advancement. Greek remains the primary language for conducting commerce and diplomatic relations. Philosophical concepts filter their way into theological discussions, yet this blending of cultures generates significant tension. At what point does accommodation cross the line into excess? Even the calendar itself transforms into contested territory. Romans organize the passage of time around their festivals and imperial commemorations. Jewish people measure months according to the lunar cycle and years based on the temple calendar. Even the straightforward act of marking time necessitates choices regarding identity and allegiance. Within this complex environment, prophetic literature experiences a flourishing period. Books such as Daniel and Enoch capture the imagination of people searching for indications of divine intervention. They contain descriptions of kingdoms that rise and subsequently fall, of beasts possessing terrible teeth, of a son of man arriving with the clouds of heaven. Dreams and visions multiply during periods of intense stress. Common people report experiencing encounters with angelic beings. Farmers suddenly find themselves speaking in languages they have never learned. Merchants abandon their commercial enterprises to follow wandering preachers. The boundary separating heaven from earth appears thinner than is typically the case. This represents the world responsible for shaping Judas Iscariot. A world where political realities and religious devotion weave together like individual threads within a tapestry. Where hope and despair perform their dance together like partners intimately familiar with each step. Where the desperate cry for a Messiah grows increasingly louder with each year that passes. The stage has been properly set. The participants are assuming their designated positions. And somewhere behind the scenes, a young individual named Judas makes his preparations to step into the brilliant spotlight of history. Judas as a human being. The hills characteristic of Judah rise and fall like slumbering giants beneath the Mediterranean sun. Somewhere among these stones, worn smooth by time, an infant named Judas takes his first breath. His parents, individuals whose names history has not preserved, gaze down upon their son, experiencing that same combination of hope, mingled with concern that has characterized new parents since time began. The family name Iscariot attaches itself to him with the persistence of a shadow. Certain scholars trace its origins to Kerioth, a settlement that occupies the heart of Judah like a precious stone set within weathered rock. Others hint at darker possibilities. The Sicarii, those urban fighters who conceal curved daggers beneath their outer garments, recruit young men from families touched by profound loss and smoldering anger. If Judas originates from Kerioth, his childhood unfolds in a location where stories possess greater value than physical comfort. The town sits perched atop a hill, with a view overlooking trade routes that have carried merchant caravans since the days of Solomon. Here, traders from distant territories pause to rest and obtain fresh supplies. Their accounts of far-off places blend with local legends in the evening atmosphere. His father might work the land, hands made coarse through contact with olive branches and grapevines. The soil of Judah surrenders its treasures with great reluctance. Each harvest demands patience and prayer in equal proportions. Young Judas absorbs this lesson early in life, that the earth yields nothing without genuine struggle. This understanding shapes his perception of how the world operates. Alternatively, perhaps his father labors with his hands in different capacities, a carpenter similar to that teacher from Nazareth whom Judas will eventually follow. A potter giving form to clay, creating vessels that will transport water and wine to tables throughout the surrounding region. A metal worker fashioning tools that will survive beyond the hands that employ them. The mother of this boy teaches him the traditional songs of Israel. Her voice carries melodies that have brought comfort to Jewish children across many generations. She relates to him stories featuring courageous kings and faithful prophets. Her hands provide guidance to his fingers as he acquires the skill of forming letters in the ancient language. Through her influence, he inherits the hopes and aspirations of his people. The local synagogue becomes a second home for young Judas. Here, beneath simple beams of wood, he gains the ability to read from sacred scrolls. The words spoken by Moses flow through his consciousness like water traveling through a dry riverbed. The Psalms composed by David create echoes within his heart. The prophecies recorded by Isaiah plant seeds destined to grow into specific expectations. His instructors recognize something distinctive about the boy. Perhaps it manifests in the manner he comprehends complex concepts. Perhaps it shows through the intensity characterizing his questions. Perhaps it simply reveals itself through the hunger visible in his eyes, whenever the scriptures speak of deliverance and restoration. Whatever the explanation, they choose to invest additional time in his education. The festivals observed by Israel establish the rhythm governing Judas's childhood years. Passover brings the entire family to Jerusalem, where they unite with thousands of fellow pilgrims in remembering liberation from Egypt. The boy's eyes grow wide upon beholding the temple's golden doors. His nostrils fill with the combined scent of incense and sacrificial offerings. His ears resound with trumpets and communal singing. During celebrations marking the harvest, Judas comes to understand the significance of gratitude. The community assembles to acknowledge God's provision. Children run freely between the adults, their joyful laughter mixing with prayers of thanksgiving. The young individual stores these images within his memory, though he does not yet comprehend how precious they will ultimately become. As Judas progresses toward manhood, the political situation throughout Judea grows more intense. Roman taxation increases in severity with each year that passes. Local officials demand bribes for even the most basic services. The divide between wealthy and impoverished widens like a developing crack in a foundation. Young men begin speaking in whispers regarding resistance and revolutionary action. The personality of this boy takes definite form during these years of development. He possesses an acute intelligence that cuts through superficiality to reach the core of matters. His questions frequently make adults feel uncomfortable. He demonstrates minimal patience for responses that fail to satisfy his deeper yearnings. This intellectual keenness will prove beneficial to him, but it simultaneously sets him apart from those his own age. Judas earns a reputation for dependability. When tasks require completion, others seek him out. When money needs careful counting, they place trust in his meticulous attention to detail. When plans require formulation, they recognize value in his ability to identify potential problems before they manifest. These qualities will eventually result in his appointment as treasurer for Jesus' inner circle. Yet beneath this surface-level competence, something restless stirs within. The young individual feels the burden of his people's suffering. He observes the Roman soldiers wearing their scarlet cloaks. He watches as tax collectors grow prosperous while farmers forfeit their ancestral lands. He hears elderly people weeping for those days when Israel stood with pride among the nations. The scriptures provide fuel for this restlessness burning within him. Every prophecy concerning the approaching kingdom burns like fire within his bones. Every promise regarding restoration seems to mock the reality he experiences in the present. Young Judas begins to question why God delays his intervention. For what reason does the Almighty permit his chosen people to endure suffering under foreign rule? The financial circumstances of his family shape his worldview through subtle yet significant ways. Perhaps they struggle to meet basic needs, teaching him to recognize the value contained in every single coin. Perhaps they achieve a degree of modest prosperity, providing him a glimpse of what comfort resembles. Either way, money transforms into something he comprehends in practical terms rather than through abstract principles. The community surrounding Judas buzzes with speculation regarding the Messiah. Traveling preachers arrive, offering new interpretations of ancient prophecies. Workers of wonders claim to provide demonstrations of divine power. Political rebels recruit followers through promises of liberation. The young individual observes these movements with increasing fascination. His religious education continues extending beyond childhood years. The local rabbi demonstrates special interest in monitoring his progress. Advanced students gather within the teacher's residence to wrestle with difficult passages. They engage in debates concerning the meaning of prophecy and the nature of divine justice. These discussions sharpen the theological understanding possessed by Judas, while simultaneously deepening his questions. The transition from boyhood into manhood brings fresh responsibilities. Judas must select a path for directing his life. Will he pursue his father's trade? Will he dedicate himself to religious studies? Will he seek to make his fortune in the broader world? Each option carries its distinct risks and potential rewards. The character of this young individual solidifies during these pivotal years. He cultivates a fierce loyalty toward those he determines worthy of trust. He demonstrates courage when confronted with adversity. He displays compassion for those experiencing suffering. Yet, he also exhibits impatience with weakness and frustration with compromise. As Judas approaches complete adulthood, the stage becomes properly set for his encounter with destiny. The political situation throughout Palestine continues experiencing deterioration. Religious expectations continue their upward climb. The gap separating hope from reality continues to widen. Into this volatile mixture will step a teacher from Nazareth, and young Judas Iscariot will confront the choice that will establish his position in history. The boy who once played throughout the hills of Judah has matured into a man carrying the dreams and disappointments characteristic of his generation. He occupies a position at the crossroads of his personal narrative, prepared to take that next step toward a garden where his name will reverberate through eternity. Encountering the rabbi from Nazareth. The morning sun captures the dust particles kicked upward by sandaled feet upon the road leading to Capernaum. News moves with greater speed than the travelers themselves throughout this corner of Galilee. Word spreads outward from village to village, comparable to ripples expanding across the surface of the great lake. A new teacher has made his appearance. a rabbi whose words carry authority unlike anything heard from the scribes and Pharisees. Judas Iscariot catches wind of the whispers circulating through the marketplace. A son of a carpenter from Nazareth has commenced gathering followers around himself. This individual performs wonders that resist explanation. He delivers teachings through parables that adhere to the mind like burrs clinging to a traveler's cloak. Some suggest he might be the promised one, that Messiah who will restore the kingdom to Israel. The young individual from Kerioth feels his pulse begin to quicken. He has been waiting for this moment, though he could not have articulated what precisely he was waiting for. The scriptures have prepared him for this. The prayers from his childhood have shaped his expectations. Now possibility walks the roads of Galilee clothed in human form. Perhaps Judas first encounters Jesus within the synagogue at Capernaum. The teacher rises to read from the scroll of Isaiah. His voice carries those ancient words with renewed power. The congregation stirs as familiar prophecies assume new meaning. Eyes widen as this carpenter's son sits himself down and declares that the scripture has reached fulfillment in their very hearing. Or maybe their meeting occurs beside the lake, where fishermen are engaged in mending their nets. Jesus walks along that shore, calling ordinary individuals to follow him. Simon and Andrew release their nets without a moment's hesitation. James and John depart, leaving their father Zebedee seated in the boat. Something within the teacher's presence makes immediate obedience feel like the sole reasonable response. Judas observes these scenes unfolding with mounting fascination. This Jesus does not resemble the conquering king described by the prophets. He wears clothing of simple design and speaks with an accent characteristic of Galilee. His hands display the calluses resulting from honest labor. Yet authority radiates outward from him, comparable to heat emanating from a fire. When he speaks, even the wind itself appears to listen attentively. The initial miracle Judas witnesses shakes the very foundation of his understanding regarding what is possible. Perhaps it involves the healing of a leper, skin made clean through a single touch. Perhaps it involves the casting out of a demon, a tormented individual restored to sanity through a spoken word. Perhaps it manifests as something even more dramatic, a paralyzed individual walking homeward carrying his own stretcher. Whatever the sign happens to be, it confirms what Judas has begun to suspect. This teacher from Nazareth operates with divine authority flowing through him. The power of God courses through him, comparable to water flowing through a channel. The kingdom of heaven has drawn near through his person. The time of fulfillment has arrived at last. The decision to follow Jesus crystallizes gradually at first, then suddenly all at once. Judas discovers himself drawn toward the teacher's presence. The words spoken by this man answer questions the young individual has carried for years. The vision of the kingdom Jesus presents aligns with everything Judas has hoped for. Here, at last, stands someone possessing the capability to lead Israel to freedom. The call arrives like a sunrise, gradual in its approach, then blinding in its intensity. Jesus looks upon Judas with eyes that appear capable of seeing beneath the surface of things. The teacher's voice speaks his name, though they have never received a proper introduction. The invitation is both simple and profound in nature. Follow me. Judas experiences no hesitation. He finds himself incapable of hesitation. This moment possesses the quality of destiny, unfolding according to some ancient plan. He rises from whatever activity was occupying him and falls into step behind the rabbi from Nazareth. The old life reaches its conclusion. The new life commences. The journey toward Calvary begins with a single step. The early days of discipleship intoxicate Judas with pure possibility. He joins a band of individuals who believe they participate in something unprecedented. They possess front-row seats to witness the inauguration of God's kingdom. They observe miracles destined to be remembered across many generations. They hear teachings that will reshape human understanding of divine love. Jesus treats those who follow him as family. He shares his food with them, his wisdom with them, his mission with them. The disciples discover that following the Messiah means more than they anticipated. It means belonging to something larger than their individual selves. It means participating in the restoration of all things. But even during these early days, Judas notices things that puzzle him. Jesus demonstrates mercy toward Roman soldiers. He dines with tax collectors and those society labels as sinners. He speaks of loving enemies and turning the other cheek when struck. The kingdom he proclaims fails to match the kingdom most Jewish people expect. The parables spoken by the teacher reveal as much as they conceal. Stories about seeds and soil, about lost sheep and prodigal sons, about laborers in a vineyard and talents buried in the ground. Each tale contains layers of meaning that unfold slowly, comparable to flowers opening to receive the sun. Judas finds himself simultaneously enlightened and confused by these verbal puzzles. The crowds gathering around Jesus expand in size with each day that passes. Sick people arrive from distant villages, seeking healing. Curious observers come to investigate the circulating rumors. Religious leaders appear for the purpose of testing the teacher's orthodoxy. The movement gains momentum comparable to a stone rolling down a hillside. Yet Jesus appears strangely ambivalent regarding his growing popularity. He frequently withdraws from the crowds to pray in solitude. He warns people against spreading news of his miracles. He speaks mysteriously about his ultimate destination, employing phrases that send chills through the disciples' hearts. The teacher they follow carries secrets that even his closest friends cannot begin to fathom. Judas begins to comprehend that following Jesus means more than merely witnessing wonders. It means embracing a way of living that inverts conventional wisdom. The first shall occupy the last position. The meek shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who mourn. The kingdom of God belongs to children and outcasts and broken people. The intellectual challenge presented by Jesus' teaching captivates Judas. Here stands a mind capable of matching wits with the most learned scribes. Here beats a heart capable of touching the deepest human longings. Here dwells a spirit that appears to commune directly with the divine. The young individual from Kerioth feels privileged to walk in such company. As days transform into weeks and weeks into months, Judas settles into the rhythm characterizing itinerant ministry. The disciples move from town to town, synagogue to synagogue, hillside to hillside. They sleep beneath stars and consume whatever supporters provide. They learn to depend upon divine provision and human kindness. The teacher begins entrusting greater responsibilities to those who follow him. He sends them outward in pairs to preach and heal. He shares deeper truths with them during private moments. He prepares them for a mission destined to outlast his earthly presence. The disciples sense they are being equipped for something momentous. Yet questions multiply alongside blessings. For what reason does Jesus refuse to claim the throne that rightfully belongs to him? Why does he speak with such frequency about suffering and death? Why does he appear to court conflict with the religious authorities? The pieces of this puzzle refuse to fit together in ways that make sense to human logic. Judas finds himself appointed to serve as the group's treasurer. This responsibility reflects the trust others place in his competence and integrity. He carries the money bag and manages the practical details characterizing their shared life. This position grants him influence and authority within the inner circle. But it also grants him a unique perspective on the contradictions residing at the heart of Jesus' mission. The teacher, who speaks of storing up treasures in heaven, still requires earthly resources for daily survival. The man who will eventually receive acclaim as king currently depends upon the generosity of followers who possess little to spare. The months pass like chapters within an unfolding story. Judas witnesses more miracles than he possesses the ability to count. He hears more teachings than he can fully comprehend. He participates in a movement that appears destined to change the world. Yet, doubts begin to gnaw at the edges of his faith, comparable to termites in the foundation of a house. The rabbi from Nazareth has captured both the imagination and loyalty of Judas. The journey they have commenced together will transport them to places neither can fully foresee. The road stretching ahead winds through triumph and tragedy, through hosanna and crucifixion, through hope and despair. For the present moment, though, Judas walks bathed in the light of his teacher's presence. The future remains unwritten. The choices destined to define his legacy still lie ahead. The young individual who answered the call of Jesus with such enthusiasm cannot imagine the garden that waits at the conclusion of their journey together. The inner circle. Life as a disciple. The morning air carries the scent of bread baking in ovens some distance away. 12 individuals gather around their teacher beside the Lake of Galilee. The water laps gently against the shore, maintaining time like a heartbeat. This circle of friends has transformed into the world of Judas, his family, his home. Life, as one of the 12, means learning to exist without walls, providing shelter. The disciples sleep wherever darkness overtakes them. Sometimes they find rest in the homes of supporters. Sometimes they spread their cloaks upon hillsides beneath a canopy formed by stars. Sometimes they discover shelter in caves that shepherds have utilized for centuries. The teacher establishes the rhythm governing their days. He rises before dawn, arrives to pray in solitude, frequently slipping away, while those who follow him continue sleeping. When they wake, they discover him already engaged in deep conversation with his Father. His face glows with the afterglow of divine communion. His eyes hold secrets that touch the very edge of eternity. Jesus gathers them for the morning teaching session. His words flow comparable to water from a spring, clear and life-giving in quality. He speaks of the kingdom using language that children can understand. Yet his parables carry depths that scholars cannot begin to fathom. The disciples lean forward, hungry for every syllable that falls from his lips. The lessons occur everywhere around them. A field of wheat transforms into a classroom for teaching about harvest. A vine, heavy with grapes, illustrates the connection between branches and life itself. A sparrow falling from a tree demonstrates the Father's care for the smallest of creatures. Creation itself functions as the teacher's textbook. Judas observes as Jesus transforms ordinary moments into sacred encounters. A conversation with a Samaritan woman at a well becomes a discourse on living water. A meal shared with tax collectors becomes a lesson about the joy of redemption. A walk through a graveyard becomes a demonstration of resurrection power. The miracles become integrated into their daily experience. The disciples grow accustomed to witnessing impossible things. Sick people approach Jesus with desperate faith and depart with bodies made whole. Demons flee at the sound of his voice. Natural forces bend to his will, comparable to servants eager to please their master. Yet the teacher remains remarkably human in nature. He grows tired following long days of ministry. He feels hunger and thirst like any other individual. He experiences joy and sorrow, laughter and tears. The divine nature dwelling within him never overshadows his genuine humanity. The 12 develop their own dynamics and relationships among themselves. Peter emerges as the unofficial spokesman, quick to speak and slow to think matters through. James and John earn the nickname Sons of Thunder for their fiery temperaments. Matthew brings the precision characteristic of a tax collector to their shared life. Thomas asks the questions others feel afraid to voice. Judas discovers his place within this brotherhood. His intelligence wins respect from the others. His practical skills prove invaluable. His ability to manage money makes him the natural choice for treasurer. The common purse becomes his responsibility, a trust that reflects the confidence others place in his character. The money bag carries more than merely coins. It holds the offerings of supporters who believe in their mission. mites from widows rest beside donations from wealthy benefactors. The purse represents the intersection of heavenly calling and earthly necessity. Managing it requires both practical wisdom and spiritual discernment. Jesus teaches them to pray, using words destined to echo through centuries. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. The disciples learn to approach the Creator of the universe with the intimacy characteristic of children. They discover that prayer is less about changing God's mind and more about aligning their hearts with His purposes. The parables spoken by the teacher become conversation starters lasting for hours. What does it mean to be a good Samaritan? How do we recognize the kingdom of God? For what reason does the narrow gate lead to life? The disciples wrestle with these questions as they walk from village to village, their understanding deepening with each discussion. Meals shared together create some of their most precious memories. Jesus has a way of making ordinary food extraordinary in nature. He blesses their simple provisions with gratitude that transforms scarcity into abundance. The disciples learn that sharing multiplies rather than divides. Breaking bread together becomes a sacrament of fellowship. The compassion of the teacher for people amazes those who follow him. He never appears to grow tired of human need. Lepers find cleansing in his presence. Blind individuals receive sight. Deaf ears open to the sound of his voice. The disciples witness love in action, day after day, miracle after miracle. Yet Jesus also challenges them with hard sayings that are difficult to accept. He speaks of taking up crosses and losing life to find it. He talks about leaving everything behind to follow him. He warns that his path leads through suffering to glory. The disciples struggle to reconcile these difficult teachings with their expectations of triumph. The religious authorities begin to take notice of their movement. Pharisees appear at the edges of crowds, taking notes and asking pointed questions. Scribes challenge the interpretations of Scripture offered by Jesus. The tension builds comparable to storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Jesus prepares his disciples for greater responsibility ahead. He sends them outward in pairs to preach and heal. They return with stories of demons submitting to them and sick people being made whole. The teacher smiles at their excitement while warning them to rejoice more in their heavenly citizenship than in their earthly success. The inner circle witnesses moments of divine revelation destined to sustain them through dark days lying ahead. On a high mountain, Jesus undergoes transfiguration before Peter, James, and John. His face shines comparable to the sun. His clothes become white as light itself. Moses and Elijah appear to discuss his approaching departure. Judas treasures these experiences, though he cannot fully understand their significance. He observes Jesus walking on water as though the lake was solid ground. He watches 5 loaves and 2 fish feed thousands of people. He hears the teacher's voice calm storms with the authority of one who spoke the worlds into existence. The disciples learn to depend upon supernatural provision. Their needs are met through the generosity of supporters and the creative power of their teacher. They discover that seeking first the kingdom of God does indeed result in having all other things added to them. The love of the teacher for his followers becomes evident in countless small ways. He notices when they are tired and provides rest. He sees their confusion and offers clarity. He observes their fears and speaks peace. The disciples experience grace in practical form day after day, hour after hour. But questions begin to multiply alongside blessings received. For what reason does Jesus seem to avoid opportunities for political advancement? Why does he speak with such frequency about going to Jerusalem to suffer? Why does he warn them about betrayal and abandonment? The pieces of this puzzle refuse to arrange themselves in satisfying patterns. Judas finds himself torn between loyalty and doubt. He loves the teacher with the devotion of a son. He believes in the mission with the passion of a patriot. Yet he struggles to understand why Jesus seems to be leading them toward disaster rather than triumph. The other disciples mirror his bewilderment, although they voice it in different ways. They debate among themselves who will hold the highest rank in the kingdom. They propose summoning fire upon villages that show no hospitality. They attempt to block children from getting close to Jesus. Their human nature emerges through the fractures in their belief. The teacher's forbearance toward their shortcomings gives Judas encouragement. Jesus never turns his back on them in spite of their stumbles. He persists in cultivating their development in spite of their confusion. He maintains his love for them in spite of their constraints. This unearned favor plants seeds of hope in the treasurer that his personal uncertainties won't exclude him from the circle. The cadence of their communal existence forges connections that run deeper than family ties. They have traveled thousands of miles side by side. They have broken bread together innumerable times. They have been present for marvels that will fuel their accounts for all their remaining days. The 12 have transformed into brothers in the most authentic meaning of the term. Still, even inside this closely knit fellowship, Judas occasionally experiences separation. His uncertainties penetrate more profoundly than his brothers. His assumptions collide more violently with what unfolds before them. His letdowns wound more intensely than what they endure. The treasurer starts to question whether he grasps something his fellow travelers have overlooked, or whether he has gotten everything wrong from the very start. The teacher persists in loving all of them, including the one destined to hand him over. Jesus' gaze contains mercy even toward Judas, although it equally contains grief. The rabbi from Nazareth perceives what lies ahead. He witnesses the conclusion from its inception. Still, he invests himself continuously into these flawed individuals who will deliver his truth to the nations. The inner circle occupies the heart of the most significant narrative ever shared. They have been selected to observe divine love taking human form. They have been assigned to declare the breaking in of God's reign. They have been entrusted with the good news destined to reshape all human existence. For the present moment they press forward on their path as one, unconscious that their remaining time grows brief. The path before them winds toward Jerusalem, toward the upper chamber, toward the garden, where companionship will splinter and devotion will face its ultimate trial. Yet in this present hour, they remain simply 12 individuals following the teacher who has seized their affections, and summoned them towards something exceeding their own aspirations. Aspiration and disappointment. The dawn light throws elongated shadows over the Judean slopes as Judas trails behind his teacher, the coin purse weighing down his shoulder. Months have elapsed since he initially responded to Jesus' invitation, and the burden he now shoulders reaches far beyond currency and contributions. Uncertainties reproduce in his thoughts like grain dispersed by the breeze. When Judas originally enlisted among the 12, his spirit blazed with the passion for revolution. He pictured Jesus ascending to David's royal seat, expelling the Roman invaders and returning Israel to its ancient magnificence. The scriptural predictions appeared unmistakable. The Messiah would arrive as a victorious monarch, formidable in warfare, fearsome to those who opposed him. The teacher's supernatural acts had validated these assumptions. A person capable of commanding storms obviously possessed sufficient strength to overthrow rulers. A person able to multiply food for multitudes from a child's meal evidently controlled the provisions to sustain military forces. A person with power to revive corpses undoubtedly wielded the credentials to found an everlasting dominion. Yet, as the months progress, Jesus' choices perplex instead of illuminate. He declines chances for political elevation. When the masses attempt to crown him king through force, he retreats for solitary prayer. When revolutionaries present their allegiance, he discusses instead the principles of loving adversaries and offering the second cheek. The teacher's stories deepen Judas's confusion. Narratives concerning mustard seeds and concealed riches, concerning wandering sheep and wayward children, concerning laborers in a field who earn identical wages in spite of unequal effort. These tales describe a dominion governed by principles foreign to earthly powers. Undeserved kindness surpasses earned reward. Compassion supersedes retribution. Those ranked last ascend to first position. Judas attempts to harmonize these lessons with his comprehension of holy writings. The ancient voices spoke of a Messiah destined to shatter the oppressor's authority and institute fairness across the land. They portrayed a sovereign who would abolish warfare and whose reign would expand endlessly. How do Jesus' compassionate narratives align with these mighty predictions? The treasurer's analytical nature wrestles with inconsistencies that his companions appear willing to overlook. Jesus discusses accumulating riches in the eternal realm while relying on earthly contributions for sustenance. He proclaims freedom from anxiety about the future while meticulously organizing their travel plans. He instructs concerning divine supply while carefully rationing their meager provisions. The coin purse transforms into an emblem of these contradictions. Judas tallies the currency every evening, determining whether sufficient funds remain for tomorrow's requirements. The burden of fiscal accountability conflicts awkwardly with instruction about depending on God for each day's provision. How can they construct a movement lacking adequate financing? How can they confront an empire while existing as roaming beggars? Benefactors come to Jesus presenting wealth and social standing. Affluent young leaders desire to attach themselves to the movement. Prosperous women contribute from their abundance. Nevertheless, the teacher reliably steers these possibilities away from worldly acquisition toward inner renewal. Judas observes potential benefits, evaporating like moisture through spread fingers. The religious hierarchy's resistance becomes increasingly systematic and threatening. Pharisees track their activities, recording each unconventional lesson. Religious scholars contest Jesus' legitimacy with progressively antagonistic interrogations. The Sanhedrin starts perceiving the movement as a danger, demanding eradication instead of simple observation. Meanwhile, Roman powers preserve their vigilant watch. Military forces monitor the thoroughfares. Revenue collectors demand their portion. Provincial governors maintain control with brutal efficiency disguised by civilized appearances. The mechanisms of conquest continue grinding forward, seemingly untouched by the teacher's announcement that God's dominion has drawn close. Judas witnesses these circumstances with mounting exasperation. The forces crushing his nation appear more formidable than previously. The structures perpetuating unfairness persist without alteration. The uprising he anticipated has transformed into a spiritual crusade that seemingly disregards political actualities. The fellow disciples harbor portions of his anxieties, although they articulate them distinctively. James and John request prestigious positions in the approaching kingdom. Peter proclaims his preparedness to battle and perish for Jesus. Simon the Zealot contributes connections from the underground resistance. The collective's assumptions correspond more closely with traditional messianic visions than with their teacher's enigmatic purposes. Jesus' reactions to these yearnings reliably bring dissatisfaction. He discusses achieving significance through humble service instead of exercising control. He characterizes genuine leadership as cleansing feet instead of directing battalions. He guarantees his followers hardship instead of recognition, instruments of execution instead of royal headpieces. The teacher's forecasts regarding his personal fate especially unsettle Judas. Jesus references repeatedly his journey to Jerusalem, facing repudiation by the elders, condemnation by the religious hierarchy, and surrender to foreign powers. He portrays his demise in vivid specifics, mentioning execution by crucifixion as though it were unavoidable instead of preventable. These predictions appear to Judas as admissions of defeat and needless submission. Why embrace martyrdom when triumph remains within reach? Why capitulate to adversaries when supporters stand prepared for conflict? Why select the route of maximum opposition when tactical accommodation might yield superior outcomes? The treasurer starts questioning whether his teacher possesses insufficient political acumen required for successful governance. Jesus' reluctance to cultivate powerful backers confounds him. The rabbi's pattern of provoking religious officials appears strategically unwise. His readiness to fellowship with revenue collectors and social outcasts distances potential supporters from honorable society. Judas's commitment to intellectual integrity compels him to face troubling uncertainties. Perhaps he misconstrued Jesus' assignment from its commencement. Perhaps the kingdom the teacher announces differs fundamentally from the kingdom Judas envisioned. Perhaps pursuing Jesus necessitates relinquishing his most cherished aspirations for Israel's emancipation. The gravity of these acknowledgments descends upon his frame like oppressive garments. The revolutionary enthusiasm that previously animated him starts diminishing. The messianic assumptions that formerly motivated him begin disintegrating. The destiny he previously imagined starts dissolving like dawn vapor in the climbing sun. Still, Judas finds himself unable to simply depart. Excessive attachments bind him to this teacher, and this cause he has devoted excessive time, excessive effort, excessive expectation to surrender everything at this juncture. The ties of brotherhood restrain him, even as uncertainty erodes his assurance. The treasurer discovers himself suspended between realities. His affections continue embracing the teacher who summoned him to discipleship. His reasoning progressively challenges the prudence of that summons. His inner being hungers for the kingdom Jesus heralds, while his essence mourns for the kingdom appearing to recede into distance. Currency starts assuming heightened importance in Judas's considerations. The coins within his possession symbolize stability in a precarious existence. They furnish alternatives when circumstances otherwise appear to narrow toward an inescapable terminus. They present tangible responses to dilemmas that spiritual remedies fail to resolve. The treasurer recognizes how minimal his teacher's grasp appears concerning financial actualities. Jesus distributes their assets with effortless liberality. He dismisses lucrative possibilities without visible remorse. He places confidence in heavenly provision while disregarding fundamental economic logic. This apparent lack of sophistication aggravates Judas beyond his willingness to acknowledge. How can an individual so perceptive regarding spiritual dimensions display such foolishness concerning pragmatic issues? How can an individual claiming heavenly credentials appear so powerless in temporal situations? How can an individual pledging to institute a kingdom demonstrate such inadequate preparation for revolutionary expenses? The distance separating anticipation from actuality expands continuously. Judas watches alternative would-be messiahs, assembling more substantial followings and attracting more prestigious allies. He notes how political organizations acquire force through calculated partnerships and deliberate preparation. He contrasts these illustrations with Jesus's apparently aimless wanderings and impromptu instruction. The treasurer's devotion starts battling against his assessment. Affection for his teacher contradicts uncertainty about his approaches. Dedication to the mission conflicts with inquiries about its trajectory. The individual who previously followed without reservation now discovers himself advancing with progressively burdened footsteps. Still, Jesus keeps exhibiting strength that transcends mortal constraints. Supernatural interventions mark their pilgrimage like emphatic declarations in celestial communication. The teacher's utterances carry legitimacy that quiets resistance and revolutionizes hearts. His very being emanates affection that dissolves the most rigid opposition. These exhibitions of supernatural capability prevent Judas from absolute hopelessness. Perhaps his teacher functions according to understanding exceeding human comprehension. Perhaps the kingdom will arrive through methods exceeding what limited intelligence can foresee. Perhaps his uncertainties manifest constraint instead of perception. The strain between expectation and disillusionment characterizes Judas's interior terrain. He advances toward Jerusalem bearing more than currency in his possession. He transports the mass of unrealized expectations, unaddressed uncertainties, and unresolved tensions between what he desired and what he has discovered. The route, stretching forward, resembles an interrogation inscribed in powder and rock. The treasurer lacks knowledge of what awaits in the sacred metropolis. He cannot predict the decisions that will imminently face him. He can simply persist, advancing one stride at a time toward whatever fate awaits at the journey's conclusion. The journey to Jerusalem. Springtime caresses the Judean slopes with delicate touch, persuading wildflowers from the stone-filled earth. The celebration of Passover nears, pulling travelers from every region of the familiar world toward the sacred metropolis. Among the journeyers walking the time-worn paths, 13 individuals progress toward a fate none among them adequately grasps. Jesus directs his attention toward Jerusalem with the resolve of an individual honoring a rendezvous with infinity. His footsteps convey intention that his companions perceive, yet cannot articulate. The teacher, who previously roamed without constraint through Galilee, now advances with exclusive concentration toward David's city. The disciples detect an alteration in their master's bearing. The spontaneous gladness that formerly distinguished his work has surrendered to something more profound and more grave. He references more regularly hardship and mortality. His communion with heaven extends longer and intensifies. His vision contains darkness that troubles those devoted to him. Judas proceeds among the 12, the coin purse tapping against his side with every stride. The currency contained within signifies their humble assets, vigilantly administered and purposefully utilized. As financial steward, his thoughts remain constantly on pragmatic concerns. Where will lodging be found in Jerusalem? How will they manage the expense of Passover arrangements? What consequences await their purpose if the religious powers move against them? The teacher's latest conduct has intensified conflicts with the Sanhedrin. His purification of the temple grounds generated adversaries among the commercial interests. His confrontations with Pharisees and Sadducees have grown increasingly direct before witnesses. His expanding influence endangers the precarious equilibrium the religious authorities preserve with Roman governance. Information arrives to them, traveling that the senior priests have produced orders for Jesus' capture. The Sanhedrin has identified him as a threatening agitator whose instruction jeopardizes civic stability. Compensation has been established for intelligence regarding his location. The trap contracts around their modest assembly of adherents. These circumstances compel Judas to acknowledge the direction of their cause. The teacher he pursued with such anticipation now seems to be guiding them toward guaranteed annihilation. The kingdom they anticipated establishing appears more distant than previously. The transformation they believed they were participating in has evolved into an advance toward sacrifice. The treasurer's thoughts accelerate through alternative possibilities. Perhaps Jesus plans to provoke a collision that will mobilize the population to his mission. Perhaps he intends to reveal divine strength in manners that will demand acknowledgement from the powers. Perhaps he possesses knowledge about the Father's intentions that he has withheld from his companions. Yet these optimistic prospects clash with the teacher's progressively unambiguous forecasts. Jesus articulates openly concerning being handed over by one among his personal followers. He characterizes his approaching demise in explicit specifics. He cautions that his adherents will disperse when catastrophe arrives. These predictions resemble declarations of certainty instead of articulations of apprehension. The fellow disciples respond to these forecasts with differing intensities of resistance and bewilderment. Peter announces his readiness to perish before permitting injury to reach his master. James and John confirm their preparedness to consume from whatever vessel Jesus must empty. Thomas represents numerous others when he states, "Let us accompany him and die with him." Their allegiance moves Jesus profoundly. Nevertheless, he perceives their declarations surpass their comprehension. When the instant of examination arrives, virtuous aspirations will demonstrate inadequate, mortal frailty will overcome spiritual resolve. Devotion will surrender to terror when the consequences become evident. Judas attends to these interactions with intensifying internal struggle. Portions of him respect the fellow disciples' commitment. Portions of him doubt their inexperience. Portions of him question whether he singularly perceives the catastrophe approaching with alarming precision. The treasurer's association with currency starts transforming during this interval. The coins within his possession no longer signify merely functional costs. They evolve into emblems of protection in a progressively unpredictable reality. They present choices that allegiance by itself cannot furnish. Jerusalem expands more prominently upon the skyline with every advancing day. The municipal fortifications capture the evening illumination like a coronet of pale stone. Travelers inundate the pathways from all bearings, their utterances elevated in melodies of pilgrimage. The environment vibrates with religious anticipation and political strain. Jesus' instruction during this concluding expedition assumes increased immediacy and precision. He discusses the kingdom's arrival in language, suggesting both victory and calamity. He portrays a son of humanity who will be elevated to attract all humanity toward himself. He cautions of assessment that will divide the genuine from the counterfeit. The narratives grow more somber and more focused, accounts concerning wedding celebrations where summoned attendees decline to attend, chronicles of attendants who mistreat their master's holdings during his absence, cautions concerning prudent and imprudent attendants who await a bridegroom's arrival. Each account carries significance that weighs upon the disciples' spirits. Judas discovers himself especially influenced by Jesus' narrative concerning resources assigned to attendants. The account disturbs him with its suggestions about responsibility and management. What actions has he taken with the possibilities his teacher has provided him? How will he give account for the confidence deposited in his care? The masses assembling around Jesus increase in magnitude and heterogeneity. Revolutionaries intermingle with Pharisees. Roman collaborators proceed alongside Jewish separatists. The impoverished and frantic press toward the teacher, anticipating restoration or benediction. The prosperous and influential monitor from protected intervals, evaluating dangers and possibilities. This unstable combination of anticipations and objectives generates an environment prepared for confusion and collision. Separate factions impose their personal aspirations upon Jesus, perceiving in him the satisfaction of their distinctive visions. Scarcely any comprehend that his assignment surpasses their classifications and assumptions. The religious hierarchy's monitoring becomes more apparent and invasive. Informants pursue the assembly at protected intervals, documenting everything Jesus articulates and performs. Temple security materializes at the periphery of assemblies, prepared to respond if authorization is transmitted. The constriction of institutional resistance intensifies with every advancing day. Roman military forces preserve their attendance with vocational precision. They comprehend that Passover invariably introduces the danger of separatist uprisings. Any disruption endangering civic stability will be extinguished with excessive might. The tranquility they impose is the tranquility of mortality, hushed and motionless. Judas monitors these political actualities with the perceptive vision of an individual educated to address pragmatic situations. The arithmetic of transformation does not support their modest assembly of adherents. The probabilities opposing achievement extend longer with every additional adversary they acquire. The teacher's unwillingness to construct calculated partnerships appears progressively imprudent. Still, supernatural interventions persist in marking their expedition. Those without vision obtain perception, those unable to walk gain mobility, those lacking hearing receive sound. Intelligence of these marvels propagates more rapidly than the journeyers themselves, attracting progressively substantial assemblies to observe the teacher's capabilities. Heavenly legitimacy reveals itself in spite of mortal resistance. These exhibitions of supernatural capacity grant Judas temporary anticipation that perhaps his apprehensions lack foundation. Perhaps Jesus controls assets exceeding mortal computation. Perhaps the Father will act to safeguard his selected representative. Perhaps the kingdom will materialize through heavenly strength instead of mortal organization. Yet these anticipations diminish when he observes the teacher's persistent susceptibility to capture, legal proceedings, and termination. If Jesus can restore the afflicted and revive the deceased, why cannot he shield himself from his adversaries? If he commands divine legitimacy, why does he yield to mortal resistance? If he authentically represents God's offspring, why does he advance so readily toward anguish? The concluding approach to Jerusalem amplifies every sentiment and clarifies every uncertainty. The sacred metropolis ascends before them like a stronghold constructed from rock and supplication. Within its fortifications await the temple where God's manifestation resides, the Sanhedrin governing Jewish existence, and the Roman garrison guaranteeing imperial domination. Jesus regards the metropolis with moisture descending his countenance. He grieves for its magnificence and its sightlessness, its sacredness and its rigidity. He perceives what might have materialized and what must presently transpire. His spirit fractures for the population who will dismiss their instant of divine visitation. The disciples observe their teacher's passionate expression with bewilderment and anxiety. Why does approaching Jerusalem generate sadness instead of celebration? Why does the vision of the sacred metropolis stimulate moisture instead of festivity? Why does their victorious arrival resemble more a burial march than a triumph celebration? Judas experiences the gravity of imminent resolution compressing upon him like tangible mass. The route they traverse leads to an intersection where he must select between rival allegiances. The teacher he cherishes appears resolved to annihilate himself and his assignment. The mission he embraced appears fated for collapse. The treasurer's palm shifts instinctively to the coin purse at his flank. The currency contained within signifies more than functional resources at present. They represent alternatives to sacrifice, possibilities exceeding self-destruction, routes away from the catastrophe his teacher appears resolved to welcome. The sun descends behind them as they execute their concluding approach to Jerusalem. The following day, they will penetrate the metropolis amid assemblies proclaiming, "Hosanna." Within 7 days, those identical assemblies will insist upon crucifixion. The treasurer cannot perceive this destiny distinctly, but he detects the approaching tempest with the perception of an individual educated to assess expenses and evaluate hazards. The route they traverse has transformed into a corridor between realities. Behind them extends the certainty of their Galilean work. Forward waits the uncertainty of their Jerusalem fate. Judas proceeds between these circumstances, transporting coins that will imminently transform into mechanisms of betrayal and a spirit that will imminently fracture beneath the gravity of inconceivable selections. Palm Sunday to temple purification. The dawn illumination ascends over Jerusalem like a metallic proclamation heralding the commencement of celebration period. Passover draws close, and the sacred metropolis expands with travelers from every region of the Jewish realm. The atmosphere pulsates with expectation and supplication, dialects and tongues combining like pigments on a creator's surface. Jesus and his followers approach the Mount of Olives, that time-honored elevation surveying the temple's brilliant fortifications. The teacher halts in his expedition, his vision examining the assemblies beneath. Something significant agitates in the ethereal environment. Paradise and creation prepare to converge in manners that will reverberate through all ages. The teacher dispatches 2 followers forward with particular directions. They will locate a juvenile donkey secured near the settlement entrance. When interrogated about acquiring it, they should merely state, "The Lord requires it." The creature will be delivered without opposition, as though fate itself coordinates the particulars. Judas monitors these arrangements with the perception of an individual habituated to administering pragmatic situations. The representation impacts him instantaneously. Zechariah's prediction discusses a monarch approaching Jerusalem, modest and mounted upon a donkey. The teacher appears determined to satisfy this time-honored commitment in the most visible manner achievable. The followers return with the donkey as forecasted. They distribute their garments across its frame, fabricating an improvised seat for their master. Jesus mounts the creature with the nobility of a monarch assuming his seat of authority. The march commences its decline toward the metropolis beneath. Information of their approach circulates through the traveler settlements like combustion through parched vegetation. Assemblies accumulate along the pathway, attracted by accounts of the miracle performer from Galilee. Children sprint forward, their utterances radiant with enthusiasm. Adults pursue more tentatively, uncertain what to anticipate from this peculiar royal march. The proclamations commence without planning, erupting from spirits long conditioned to anticipate liberation. Hosanna to David's descendant. The time-honored expressions convey ages of messianic yearning. Honored is the individual who arrives in the Lord's designation. The population acknowledges something momentous, transpiring, although they cannot entirely comprehend its significance. Palm fronds materialize as though summoned from emptiness. Travelers sever branches from adjacent vegetation and brandish them like standards of triumph. Others distribute their garments on the pathway before the donkey's hooves, fabricating a royal pathway of common textiles. The unplanned coronation progresses with the strength of prediction actualizing itself. Judas discovers himself transported along in the assembly's exhilaration in spite of his expanding hesitations about the teacher's approaches. The widespread approval feels intoxicating following months of mounting resistance from religious powers. Perhaps this exhibition of collective backing will compel a reassessment of political prospects. The treasurer's analytical intelligence examines the assembly's constitution. Galilean travelers dominate, individuals who have received accounts of Jesus' supernatural acts and instruction. Jerusalem residents remain more tentative, monitoring from entrances and elevated positions. The religious hierarchy is conspicuously missing from the festivity. Jesus proceeds through the exaltation with a combination of sadness and reception. He perceives what these assemblies anticipate from their acclaimed Messiah. They desire emancipation from Roman subjugation. They seek re-establishment of political sovereignty. They envision Israel's restoration to magnificence among the territories. Yet, the kingdom he delivers functions by alternative standards than temporal governments. His coronet will be fabricated from piercing vegetation instead of precious metal. His seat of authority will be an execution device instead of polished material. His triumph will materialize through mortality instead of domination. The separation between anticipation and actuality expands like an abyss. The march arrives at the temple elevation as the evening illumination projects elongated darkness across the courtyard. The sacred enclosures bustle with mercantile movement that has accumulated around the offering structure. Currency exchanges transact business beneath covered walkways constructed for supplication. Vendors distribute birds and livestock to travelers requiring sacrifices. Jesus examines this tableau with vision that blazes with legitimate indignation. The dwelling of supplication has transformed into a commercial center. The residence of the Supreme Being has been converted into a location for exploitation. The sacred has been subordinated to the mercantile in manners that ridicule the fundamental intention of devotion. What transpires subsequently astonishes even the followers who believed they comprehended their teacher thoroughly. Jesus commences overturning the surfaces of currency exchanges with violent intensity. Coins disperse across the stone surface like metallic precipitation. Vendors retreat as their meticulously organized merchandise crashes to the surface. The teacher's utterance resonates across the courtyard with prophetic legitimacy. My dwelling shall be designated a dwelling of supplication for all territories, yet you have transformed it into a location of exploitation. His expressions reverberate off the temple fortifications like atmospheric disturbance from an unclouded atmosphere. The assembly becomes hushed, astonished by the exhibition of heavenly indignation. Judas monitors these occurrences, progressing with mounting concern. The treasurer within him recoils at the fiscal detriment signified by the overturned surfaces. The pragmatic strategist within him acknowledges the connection-severing character of this collision. The devoted follower within him respects his teacher's bravery while doubting his prudence. The temple powers respond with foreseeable outrage. Senior priests and scholars press through the assembly, their countenances darkened with indignation. How dare this Galilean commoner contest their legitimacy in the sacred enclosures? How dare he interrupt the systematic commerce supporting the offering structure? Yet they cannot respond instantaneously. The assembly's sympathy evidently aligns with Jesus. Any effort to apprehend him presently would endanger a disruption that might attract Roman involvement. The powers must satisfy themselves with recording observations and organizing their reaction for a more favorable instant. The purification generates spreading consequences that reach far beyond the temple courtyard. Vendors depending on temple commerce discover their subsistence endangered. Religious authorities witness their legitimacy contested. Roman administrators obtain reports of a disruption that might signal developing rebellion. Jesus persists, instructing in the temple courts throughout the period, as though claiming the sacred territory for its designated intention. His expressions attract assemblies of travelers hungry for genuine spiritual guidance. Children vocalize hosannas in the covered walkways, their pure utterances conveying what mature utterances dare not articulate. The teacher's narratives during this interval grow more penetrating and more concentrated. He discusses corrupt tenants who dismiss the vineyard proprietor's offspring. He portrays a wedding celebration where summoned attendees decline to attend. He cautions of stones, vocalizing when mortal utterances become hushed. Each account impacts its objective with precise accuracy. The religious authorities recognize themselves in the unfavorable representations Jesus creates. Their indignation intensifies with every advancing day. Strategies commence forming in the darkness of sacred chambers. The trap persists, constricting around the teacher and his adherents. Judas monitors these progressions with the perceptive examination of an individual educated to administer assets and evaluate hazards. The teacher's conduct has eliminated any prospect of harmonious cohabitation with the religious hierarchy. The connection back to protection has been extensively severed. The treasurer's intelligence computes the probabilities confronting their modest cause. Arranged opposing them stand the Sanhedrin, with its political associations, the temple security with their armaments, the Roman powers with their battalions. On their flank stand several dozen followers and the unstable backing of travelers who will depart to their residences when the celebration concludes. The arithmetic of transformation does not support their mission. The teacher's unwillingness to construct calculated partnerships now appears not merely imprudent, but self-annihilating. His resolve to confront the hierarchy immediately guarantees their annihilation. The kingdom they anticipate establishing appears more distant than previously. Still, supernatural interventions persist, flowing from Jesus' palms like moisture from a fountain. Those without vision obtain perception in the temple courts. Those unable to walk proceed through the sacred covered walkways. Those unable to vocalize chant praises to the divine. Heavenly strength reveals itself in spite of mortal resistance. These exhibitions of supernatural legitimacy grant Judas temporary anticipation that perhaps his apprehensions lack foundation. Perhaps the teacher controls assets exceeding mortal computation. Perhaps the father will act to safeguard his selected representative. Perhaps triumph will materialize through heavenly strength instead of political calculation. Yet these anticipations diminish when Judas contemplates the teacher's persistent susceptibility to capture and termination. If Jesus can restore afflictions and expel malevolent forces, why does he remain vulnerable to mortal dangers? If he authentically commands divine legitimacy, why does he not utilize it to institute his kingdom instantaneously? The period advances with escalating strain on all flanks. Religious authorities conspire in concealed chambers. Roman administrators monitor the circumstances for indicators of insurrection. Travelers appreciate the celebration while detecting undercurrents they cannot identify. The followers remain proximate to their teacher, uncertain what each fresh day will deliver. Judas discovers his allegiance progressively strained by contradictory sentiments. Affection for his teacher battles with uncertainty about his approaches. Dedication to the mission conflicts with anxiety for their continuation. Anticipation for the kingdom struggles against apprehension of annihilation. The coin purse at his flank increases in gravity with every advancing day, although its contents remain unaltered. The currency contained within no longer signifies merely functional costs. They represent choices that allegiance by itself cannot furnish. They present alternatives to the sacrifice their teacher appears resolved to welcome. The Palm Sunday victory has transformed into an empty recollection within days. The temple purification has generated adversaries who will neither disregard nor absolve. The route forward leads toward collision that only one faction can endure. Judas precedes this trajectory with intensifying reluctance, detecting that selections await him that will examine the fundamental foundations of his conviction. The anointing at Bethany. The evening darkness expands across the modest settlement of Bethany, where olive vegetation stands like time-honored guardians, protecting the residences of the devoted. This tranquil location, positioned on the eastern incline of the Mount of Olives, has transformed into a sanctuary for Jesus and his followers during these strained concluding days in Jerusalem. In the residence of Simon, whom Jesus previously restored from skin disease, a meal progresses that will reverberate through all ages. The chamber fills with the comfort of companionship and the aroma of modest nourishment shared in devotion. Martha moves energetically about providing service, her countenance radiating with the pleasure of accommodating the teacher who has favored their household beyond calculation. Lazarus reclines at the surface beside Jesus, his attendance a living verification to the capability that channels through the teacher's palms. Not extended previously, this individual lay enclosed in burial textiles, 4 days deceased in the sepulchre. Presently, he expresses joy and communicates and shares the evening nourishment. Resurrection, embodied in mortal manifestation. The followers assemble around the lowered surface, their spirits burdened with the occurrences of latest days. The temple purification has generated formidable adversaries. The religious powers articulate openly of capture and legal proceedings. The teacher himself intensifies, more unambiguous in his forecasts of anguish and mortality. Judas occupies space among his associates, the coin purse positioned beside him like a devoted companion. As financial steward, he has grown habituated to computing expenses and administering assets. His analytical intelligence continuously assesses their circumstances, considering choices and contemplating alternatives to the catastrophe that appears to approach with inexorable force. The dialogue circulates around the surface like tranquil moisture over rocks. Jesus discusses the kingdom with the identical fervor that has perpetually characterized his instruction. The followers pose inquiries that disclose both their affection and their bewilderment. The destiny remains uncertain, yet this instant contains the pleasantness of companionship undimmed by approaching griefs. Subsequently, Mary materializes, transporting an alabaster container that captures the lamp illumination like imprisoned stellar radiance. The container holds pure nard, a fragrance so valuable that its worth equals a laborer's compensation for an complete year. The aroma by itself articulates sacrifice exceeding ordinary comprehension. Without reluctance or clarification, Mary fractures the container at Jesus' lower extremities. The valuable oil flows outward like liquid devotion, its scent instantaneously saturating the complete residence. She descends beside the teacher, her moisture combining with the expensive fragrance as she anoints his lower extremities with the commitment of one who has obtained everything. The tableau progresses in quietness, fractured solely by subdued grieving. Mary's conduct articulates a dialect more profound than expressions. Her sacrifice conveys affection that cannot be restrained or computed. Her motion acknowledges the approaching darkness while celebrating the illumination that radiates within it. Yet the quietness fractures when Judas articulates, his utterance penetrating with outrage. Why was this fragrance not liquidated for 300 denarii and distributed to the impoverished? His expressions carry the resonance of pragmatic understanding and ethical anxiety. Undoubtedly, such precious assets could fulfill superior intentions than this excessive exhibition. The treasurer's resistance manifests genuine exasperation that has been accumulating for months. He has monitored Jesus decline lucrative possibilities and dismiss calculated partnerships. He has witnessed their teacher distribute assets that could have progressed their mission. This latest depletion of valuable fragrance signifies everything that disturbs him about their movement's trajectory. Fellow followers indicate concurrence with Judas's disapproval. The quantity of currency signified by the fractured container could nourish numerous hungry households. It could sustain their work for months. It could acquire provisions and assistance that would progress the kingdom's purpose. The extravagance appears both imprudent and self-centered. Yet Jesus' reaction penetrates through their pragmatic computations with the precision of heavenly viewpoint. Allow her solitude. Why do you disturb her? She has performed a magnificent action toward me. His expressions carry tranquil legitimacy that converts disapproval into comprehension. The teacher persists, his utterance substantial with sentiment. The impoverished you will perpetually possess with you, and whenever you desire you can perform kindness for them, yet you will not perpetually possess me. The declaration suspends in the atmosphere like a prediction of approaching division. Jesus subsequently articulates expressions that will maintain Mary's conduct in mortal recollection perpetually, wherever the good news is announced in the complete realm. What she has performed will be communicated in recollection of her. The fractured container transforms into an emblem of affection that surpasses pragmatic constraints. Judas attends to these expressions with intensifying discomfort. The teacher's protection of Mary's conduct contests his most fundamental presumptions about appropriate management. How can depleting valuable assets be designated magnificent? How can extravagance be elevated beyond productivity? The treasurer's analytical intelligence struggles to harmonize Jesus' instruction with his genuine conduct. The teacher who speaks about caring for those in poverty receives this expensive gift and raises no objection. The man who teaches others about prudent resource management praises what seems like reckless squandering. Yet hidden beneath the concern Judas voices for the needy runs a much deeper dissatisfaction with how his teacher operates. That shattered jar embodies everything that confuses him about the way Jesus conducts his work. This lavish act represents the impractical romanticism that appears to drive their entire endeavor. The scent from that perfume keeps filling the room, establishing an environment of holy meeting. What's broken cannot be made whole again. What's poured out cannot be gathered back. Mary has offered her treasure entirely, holding nothing back, with no chance of retrieval. This permanent quality of what she's done particularly disturbs Judas. The accountant within him prizes caution and methodical preparation. The pragmatic side of him favors expenditures that can be reversed should situations shift. The careful follower within him doubts promises that leave no pathway for withdrawal. Still, something about Mary's deed stirs him profoundly. Those tears reveal affection that refuses mathematical limits. That sacrifice shows commitment that rises above utilitarian thinking. That action conveys trust that embraces giving all to the one worthy of everything. The remaining disciples start grasping the symbolic significance of Mary's gesture. That anointing substance customarily designates monarchs and religious leaders for their holy responsibilities. Through pouring it upon Jesus, Mary recognizes his sacred mission and coming ordeal. What she does becomes both a crowning ceremony and an act of preparation. However, Judas discovers himself growing more alone in his failure to accept this perspective. Where others perceive beauty in that broken container, he sees only wastefulness. Where others discover significance in this excessive display, he finds only aggravation. Where others honor the offering, he tallies up the deficit. What the treasurer criticizes exposes more regarding his internal condition than regarding Mary's deed. These months of accumulating disappointment have fashioned a filter through which he interprets each occurrence. The distance separating his assumptions from actual circumstances tints how he views everything his teacher performs or permits. The evening progresses. Though the atmosphere has transformed, Mary's offering has drawn a boundary separating those who comprehend love's reasoning from those who demand utilitarian arguments. The disciples discover themselves selecting positions in an argument that will resonate across the ages. Jesus discusses his imminent leaving, using words that simultaneously disclose and mask his intention. The moment has arrived for the Son of Man to receive glory. That grain of wheat needs to drop into the ground and perish if it hopes to produce abundant harvest. The shepherd faces striking, and the flock will disperse. These forecasts disturb every disciple, yet they impact Judas most severely. The treasurer has committed everything to this cause. He has abandoned his previous existence to follow this teacher. The prospect that everything might conclude in catastrophe and death undermines the very basis of his conviction. That perfume's aroma remains suspended in the atmosphere like visible supplication. Mary's shattered container stands as evidence of affection that offers without measuring the expense. The disciples get ready to depart this sanctuary and journey back toward Jerusalem, where adversaries accumulate like threatening clouds along the skyline. Judas lifts the money pouch with its customary mass of currency and obligations, yet this evening that burden seems more oppressive than normal. The difference between Mary's generous offering and his meticulous oversight brings forward questions he can no longer dismiss. The pathway returning to Jerusalem extends ahead of them like a route toward fate. The treasurer proceeds in quietness, his thoughts spinning with assessments that reach past monetary matters. That broken container has fractured more than mineral stone. It has split open inquiries regarding affection and allegiance, regarding intelligence and extravagance, regarding following a teacher whose methods resist ordinary comprehension. The coming day will introduce fresh obstacles and more profound emergencies. The religious powers persist in their scheming. The Roman administrators continue their watchfulness. The disciples wrestle with anxieties they cannot articulate. Yet tonight, that aroma of selfless devotion permeates the atmosphere, a signal that certain offerings surpass the reasoning of worldly calculations. The transaction, 30 silver coins. The evening atmosphere hangs thick across Jerusalem, while Judas Iscariot proceeds alone down the confined passages. His footfalls reverberate against stone barriers that have observed innumerable conspiracies across the generations. The currency pouch strikes against his torso, its customary mass now seeming like a charge instead of an obligation. 3 sunsets have elapsed since that occurrence at Bethany. The aroma of Mary's scented oil still appears to adhere to his garments, an unceasing reminder of the dispute that solidified his expanding uncertainties. His teacher's approval of such extravagance has disturbed something essential in how Judas comprehends their purpose. The treasurer's thoughts replay those events with compulsive exactness. 300 denarii, representing costly spikenard, emptied like common water. Sufficient currency to provide sustenance for numerous households across many months. Assets that might have promoted their mission, wasted in an instant of sentimental surplus. The squandering troubles him beyond what he can express. Yet deeper than monetary anxiety exists a more disturbing awareness. The teacher he has accompanied for 3 years appears resolved to invite catastrophe. The temple disruption has created adversaries among the religious hierarchy. The royal entrance on Palm Sunday has drawn unwelcome notice from Roman powers. Each choice appears designed to antagonize instead of convince. Judas discovers himself doubting everything he previously accepted regarding Jesus' objective. Where exists the calculated reasoning that establishing a realm requires? Where exists the governing shrewdness essential to confront established authority? Where exists the realistic organization that upheaval necessitates? The passages of Jerusalem throb with celebration vitality regardless of the advanced hour. Visitors pack the tight corridors, their expressions lifted in melodies of festivity. Yet underneath the apparent happiness, undercurrents of strain flow like subterranean waterways. The metropolis suspends its respiration, anticipating something meaningful to transpire. The treasurer's target this evening carries purpose. He has been contemplating, assessing, measuring alternatives with the thorough consideration that has consistently characterized his nature. The determination he has achieved seems both unavoidable and unthinkable. Still, situations have merged to render the inconceivable appear essential. The residence of Caiaphas, the chief priest, looms ahead of him, resembling a stronghold of influence and entitlement. Illumination streams from elevated openings where significant individuals transact the affairs of administering God's community. Sentries position themselves at the gateway, their attendants confirming the perils that hide in Jerusalem's dimness. Judas nears the sentries with the resolute gait of someone who has traversed a waterway that permits no return crossing. His expression conveys unwavering confidence as he solicits a meeting with the religious commanders. He possesses intelligence they will consider precious. He constitutes a possibility they cannot permit themselves to disregard. The sentries guide him across courtyards that communicate prosperity gathered through generations of temple oversight. Stone pillars uphold ceilings that protect the influential. Costly woven fabrics suspend from barriers that have absorbed the confidences of territories. This represents where the genuine choices impacting Jewish existence are formulated. The room where they conduct him holds individuals whose identities carry significance throughout Palestine. Caiaphas personally occupies the focal position of the assembly, his countenance displaying the measured demeanor of someone who has mastered disclosing nothing while observing everything. Surrounding him gather the principal priests and officials who constitute the core circle of the Sanhedrin. These represent the individuals who have been pursuing Jesus since the temple confrontation. Their observers have tracked the teacher's activities, recording his statements and behaviors. Their representatives have penetrated the assemblies that collect around him. Their strategies have been obstructed solely by the widespread backing that renders public capture excessively hazardous. Judas positions himself before them, displaying the self-possession of someone who has practiced this instant in his consciousness innumerable occasions. The treasurer who has administered the disciples' resources now readies himself to discuss the value of his teacher's existence. The arithmetic of disloyalty condensed to an uncomplicated exchange between consenting participants. Caiaphas initiates conversation, his expression carrying the refined control of experienced command. What transports one from the Galileans' closest associates to their advisory chamber? What intelligence does he hold that might benefit the objective of civic stability? What cooperation can he furnish in addressing the difficulty that Jesus constitutes? The chief priest's inquiries probe thoughtfully, evaluating the extent of Judas's dedication to his recent direction. These religious commanders have managed informers previously. They comprehend the mental state of treachery, the combination of complaint and personal advantage that compels individuals to relinquish their previous commitments. Judas answers with the forthrightness that has consistently marked his communication. He recognizes where Jesus can be located distant from the defensive masses. He grasps the teacher's patterns and inclinations. He can transfer him into their custody without the civic disruption they dread. The chamber becomes soundless as the consequences of his proposition register. Here positions the answer to their most urgent difficulty. The problematic instructor from Nazareth has situated himself outside their grasp through widespread backing. Yet one among his personal disciples now proposes to span that separation. Still, these seasoned administrators advance with wariness. What assurances can Judas furnish? What confirmation do they possess that this represents not some complex entrapment? What proof demonstrates his authentic devotion to their objective? The treasurer's responses disclose the profundity of his dissatisfaction with Jesus' approaches. He discusses a teacher who squanders assets that might assist the impoverished. He characterizes a commander who invites catastrophe instead of constructing calculated partnerships. He depicts a cause that has strayed from its course through unrealistic romanticism. However, the religious commanders perceive something beyond simple disapproval in Judas's statements. They recognize the suffering of frustrated anticipations, the resentment of violated confidence, the exasperation of a pragmatic individual observing his commitments deteriorate. These sentiments render him beneficial as exceeding simply an intelligent source. The discussion advances with the thorough exactness that designates all meaningful exchanges. What precisely does Judas intend to accomplish? Where and at what time can the capture occur? How will he guarantee that the correct individual is recognized in the obscurity? The treasurer's strategy shows the comprehensive reasoning that has rendered him capable in administering the disciples' matters. He understands that Jesus frequently retreats to the Gethsemane grove for supplication. The site provides seclusion for detention without the difficulties of mass management. The scheduling can be coordinated to reduce civic consciousness, yet the issue of recognition presents distinct obstacles. Obscurity will render identification challenging for temple sentries unfamiliar with Jesus' features. The disciples customarily attire themselves similarly and exhibit comparable physical traits. An unmistakable indication will prove essential to avoid misunderstanding. Judas suggests the greeting, "Embrace," an action so ordinary that it will generate no mistrust from the remaining disciples. The closeness of the gesture will guarantee unambiguous recognition. The cultural acceptability will supply flawless concealment for duplicity. The religious commanders value the sophistication of this resolution. The embrace converts a gesture of regard into a mechanism of betrayal. It employs the connections of companionship to achieve the annihilation of companionship. It transforms affection into hatred's instrument with creative exactness. Now arrives the inquiry that compresses every human exchange to its fundamental components. What compensation does Judas anticipate for his contribution? How much represents the teacher's existence worth to the individual who professes to value him? What sum will acquire the devotion of a relied-upon disciple? The treasurer's response discloses both assessment and scorn. 30 silver coins, the sum established by regulation for a laborer unintentionally terminated by another's livestock. The quantity indicates that he appraises Jesus no greater than an article of possession whose disappearance warrants solely minimal reimbursement. Still, the representation penetrates more profoundly than simple monetary assessment. 30 silver coins reverberate through Jewish recollection as the compensation Zechariah obtained for his prophetic work, the payment provided to one whom the community rejected. The quantity bears prophetic significance that possibly even Judas does not entirely grasp. The religious commanders accept his conditions without discussion. 30 silver coins constitutes a reasonable expenditure in resolving their most urgent difficulty. The quantity proves substantial enough to inspire authentic participation, yet modest enough to prevent monetary burden. The sum appears fitting for acquiring a troublesome instructor's elimination. The currency they enumerate into Judas's grasp conveys beyond financial significance. Each silver piece symbolizes a selection executed and a connection severed. The exchange converts the treasurer from disciple to adversary, from adherent to traitor, from companion to Judas. The mass of the currency in his grasp seems more oppressive than their material essence should justify. 30 silver coins acquire beyond intelligence and possibility. They obtain a position in chronicles that will reverberate through every generation until time's conclusion. Still, Judas receives the payment with controlled grasp and transparent vision. The pragmatic aspect within him acknowledges an equitable exchange between consenting participants. The discouraged disciple within him perceives fairness for a teacher who has wasted every possibility. The assessing treasurer within him values assets that furnish alternatives his previous commitment could not provide. The gathering terminates with preparations for interaction and synchronization. Judas will transmit notification when the ideal instant materializes. The temple sentries will be equipped to function rapidly and conclusively. The detention will be executed with minimal interference to civic stability. As he readies himself to exit, the chief priest provides concluding confirmations regarding their shared concerns. The religious commanders possess no intention to injure a guiltless individual. They merely require questioning Jesus regarding his instructions and behaviors. Fairness will be administered following appropriate legitimate protocols. These statements furnish Judas with the explanation his moral sense demands. He represents not surrendering his teacher to termination, but to fairness. He represents not annihilating Jesus, but rescuing him from his personal destructive tendencies. He represents not executing duplicity, but conducting assistance that advantages all participants involved. The treasurer proceeds back across Jerusalem's confined passages, carrying 30 silver coins, burdening his container. The currency produces sounds together with each movement, establishing a pattern that will pursue his continuing existence. The resonance reverberates against stone barriers like a bell's tolling, declaring approaching destruction. The evening atmosphere conveys the fragrance of preparation, flames, and temple incense. Visitors persist in their celebration observances, unaware that chronicles pivot on the exchange just finalized. The metropolis rests fitfully, imagining emancipation, while betrayal proceeds among its dimness. Judas returns to where the remaining disciples await, his countenance disclosing nothing regarding the selection he has executed. The currency pouch at his torso conveys beyond their customary modest resources. Concealed among the recognizable currency rest 30 silver coins that have obtained a teacher's existence and a disciple's condemnation. The outcome has been determined. The mechanism has been initiated. The embrace awaits in the grove like a destiny that permits no evasion. What commenced with frustrated anticipations has transformed into an exchange that will reverberate through perpetuity. The treasurer has finalized his transaction, and the compensation will demonstrate more costly than he previously envisioned. The coming day will introduce the Passover gathering, the concluding assembly of the teacher with his disciples. Yet tonight, while others rest in tranquility, Judas remains conscious, measuring the expense of the selection he has finalized. 30 silver coins acquire an evening's labor, yet the compensation will persist eternally. The grove anticipates. The embrace nears. And in the interval separating intention and execution, between betrayal organized and betrayal accomplished, an individual named Judas Iscariot uncovers that certain exchanges demand more than currency can ever compensate. The final meal. Evening darkness extended across Jerusalem as Jesus assembled his 12 nearest adherents for what would transform into the most commemorated gathering in Chronicles. The chamber occupied itself with comfortable lamp illumination, projecting soft radiance on recognizable countenances. Each disciple located his position surrounding the reduced table, uninformed that this assembly would resonate through generations. The gathering commenced like innumerable others they had experienced together. Bread transferred from grasp to grasp, wine distributed into basic vessels. Still, something distinct suspended in the atmosphere this evening. Jesus proceeded with silent intention, his statements carrying significance that rendered even agitated spirits become motionless. Then arrived the instant that transformed everything. Jesus elevated from his location, withdrew his external garment, and obtained a container of water. Individually, he positioned himself before each disciple, cleansing their feet with the gentleness of an attendant. The chamber descended into silence, aside from the soft sound of water and the gentle movement of fabric. When Jesus approached Judas, their gazes connected. The teacher's grasp, soon to receive puncturing, supported the feet of his traitor with the identical attention he demonstrated to John, to Peter, to all the remainder. Water flowed across dust-coated skin, and Jesus dried each foot using a cloth wrapped around his midsection. No statements transferred between them, yet something significant transpired in that sacred interval. Judas experienced the pressure of those gentle grasps. Here existed the individual he had accompanied for 3 years, the one who had discussed realms and conversion, cleansing his feet like the most humble servant. The opposition between Jesus's gestures and Judas's concealed intentions established a tempest within his being. Following Jesus's return to his location, he separated bread with ritualistic exactness. His statements resonated through the chamber like remote thunder. "This constitutes my physical form offered for you." The disciples observed, mesmerized as he elevated the vessel. "This constitutes my essence distributed for numerous individuals." Each expression appeared to inscribe itself into the surrounding atmosphere. Yet then Jesus articulated statements that suspended every spirit. "One among you will surrender me." The declaration descended like mineral into motionless liquid, transmitting disturbances of astonishment through the assembled individuals. Expressions elevated in objection, each disciple inquiring, "Is it myself?" The inquiry disclosed the profound reliance they maintained in their teacher, yet additionally, their consciousness of their personal capability for disappointment. Peter obtained John's concentration, indicating for him to inquire Jesus, who would execute this unthinkable gesture. John, positioned nearest to Jesus, murmured the inquiry. Jesus immersed a portion of bread in the container and transferred it to Judas. "What you intend to accomplish rapidly," he stated, his expression carrying both anguish and determination. Judas obtained the portion, and with it the complete significance of his choice materialized. The bread seemed oppressive in his oral cavity, like consuming minerals. Surrounding him, the remaining disciples persisted in their gathering, yet everything had transformed. The comfortable chamber abruptly seemed frigid. The soft lamp illumination appeared to oscillate with darkness. Elevating from the table, Judas proceeded toward the entrance. His footfalls reverberated in the quietness that succeeded Jesus' statements. The remaining disciples observed him depart, bewilderment inscribed on their countenances. Several assumed he was departing to distribute currency to the impoverished or to execute acquisitions for the celebration. None envisioned the authentic intention of his exit. As Judas advanced into the evening, frigid atmosphere contacted his countenance. Behind him, the chamber persisted in radiating with comfort and companionship. Ahead extended the route he had selected, obscure and uncertain. The 30 silver coins appeared to ignite in his recollection, their mass both reduced and elevated beyond his anticipation. The entrance secured behind him with a gentle impact. Within, Jesus persisted in instructing his continuing disciples, discussing affection, regarding unity, regarding the magnificence that would materialize through anguish. External. Judas proceeded through Jerusalem's confined passages, his spirit divided between the individual he had recently abandoned and the transaction he had established. Each movement transported him more distant from the elevated chamber, more distant from the prospect of reversing direction. The metropolis rested surrounding him, uninformed that Chronicle's most significant performance was prepared to transpire. Temple sentries anticipated in the darkness, equipped to accompany him to the location where they could detain Jesus, distant from the assemblies. The opposition between the dual scenes would pursue the consciousness of adherents for generations. Within, Jesus cleansing feet and separating bread in affection. External, Judas proceeding toward betrayal through vacant passages. Illumination and obscurity, assistance and personal concern, commitment and duplicity, all merging on this solitary evening. As Judas vanished into the darkness, the final gathering persisted. Yet the assembly of 12 had transformed into 11, and nothing would remain identical ever again. The Gethsemane Grove. Evening enveloped Jerusalem like an oppressive covering as Jesus guided his disciples across the metropolis's resting passages. Their target extended outside the barriers, across the Kidron Depression, where ancient olive vegetation positioned themselves in silent observation to generations of supplication and anguish. The grove, designated Gethsemane, would rapidly transform into the platform for humanity's most significant performance. The olive plantation extended ahead of them, its distorted branches extending toward the star-occupied atmosphere. These vegetation had endured innumerable tempests, their twisted structures narrating accounts of persistence and continuation. This evening they would protect the concluding hours of Jesus' liberty, their foliage producing sounds like murmured supplications in the soft wind. Jesus regularly arrived here with his disciples. The grove furnished sanctuary from the assemblies, a location where they could communicate freely and rest without interference. The disciples recognized these routes thoroughly, could traverse them even in obscurity. Yet this evening seemed distinct. An invisible pressure descended on the recognizable interval, rendering even the most assured among them uncomfortable. Departing 8 disciples near the gateway, Jesus transported Peter, James, and John more profoundly into the plantation. These 3 had observed his transformation on the elevation, had witnessed him elevate the deceased, had perceived him communicate with Moses and Elijah. Now they would observe something completely distinct, the complete pressure of human anguish descending on their teacher. As they proceeded further into the grove, Jesus' disposition transformed. The capacity that had maintained him through 3 years of work appeared to evacuate. His frame sagged under invisible burden. His respiration became strained, as though the surrounding atmosphere had transformed thick and challenging to acquire. "My spirit is overwhelmed with anguish to the threshold of termination," Jesus communicated to his 3 nearest companions. The statements emerged oppressive, like minerals descending into profound liquid. "Remain here and maintain observation with me." Then he proceeded distant from them, advancing possibly a mineral's projection separation, sufficiently removed to exist alone, yet sufficiently proximate that they could still perceive his outline against the stellar illumination. What transpired subsequently would resonate through perpetuity. Jesus descended to his lower limbs, then positioned himself completely, his countenance contacting the ground. His supplication elevated from the profundities of his existence, unprocessed and frantic. "My Creator, if this proves conceivable, may this vessel be extracted from me. Still, not as my intention, yet as your intention." The disciples observed from their location, wrestling to comprehend what they witnessed. They had witnessed Jesus pacify tempests and elevate the deceased, yet they had never witnessed him resembling this. Perspiration accumulated on his forehead, and in the obscure stellar illumination it materialized to descend like droplets of essence to the ground. His complete physical form appeared to resist against an invisible pressure. 3 occasions Jesus communicated the identical supplication, each occasion wrestling with the route ahead of him. Between each supplication, he returned to his disciples, discovering them resting. Exhaustion had conquered them, yet additionally a category of spiritual pressure that rendered maintaining consciousness nearly unattainable. "Could you not maintain observation with me for a solitary hour?" he inquired Peter, his expression carrying frustration, yet additionally comprehension. As the evening intensified, another performance transpired outside the grove barriers. Judas proceeded through Jerusalem's passages, guiding a division of temple sentries and Roman military personnel. Illumination sources oscillated in their grasps, projecting mobile darkness on the confined pathways. The resonance of their footfalls reverberated against stone barriers, a pattern that appeared to enumerate the concluding instance of Jesus' liberty. The grove maintained its tranquility, uninformed of the nearing tempest. Olive branches oscillated softly in the evening wind, their foliage establishing a gentle sound that had pacified innumerable generations. The disciples rested fitfully, their unconscious thoughts troubled by visions they couldn't comprehend. Solely Jesus maintained complete consciousness, his supplications intensifying with each transitioning hour. In the concluding instance, preceding the detention, a peculiar peacefulness established itself across the grove. Jesus, elevated from his lower limbs, his supplication finalized. The resistance was terminated. His countenance, marked with perspiration and moisture, now demonstrated peaceful determination. He had wrestled with divine intention and materialized victorious, not through evasion, yet through reception. Proceeding back to his disciples, Jesus communicated with silent control. "Elevate, let us advance, here arrives my traitor." The statements conveyed no resentment, solely melancholy recognition of what must materialize. The disciples awakened from their rest, bewilderment obscuring their countenances as they attempted to comprehend what was transpiring. Then they perceived it, the resonance of nearing footfalls, the sound of expressions, the impact of armaments. Illumination source radiance commenced to oscillate through the vegetation, intensifying with each transitioning instant. The tranquil grove was prepared to transform into a confrontation location, and the disciples' teacher was prepared to transform into a captive. Yet in those concluding instants of quietness, something significant had transpired. In the Gethsemane grove, encircled by ancient olive vegetation and resting companions, Jesus had confronted the complete pressure of human anguish and selected affection over evasion, offering over protection. The grove had observed the instant when divine intention and human intention transformed into one, establishing the foundation for the most significant gesture of affection in human chronicles. The embrace and the detention. Illumination source radiance oscillated between the olive vegetation as darkness proceeded through Gethsemane's ancient plantations. The tranquil grove, instants previously occupied solely with gentle leaf sounds and the soft respiration of resting disciples, now reverberated with the resonance of nearing footfalls. An assembly materialized from the obscurity. Temple sentries, Roman military personnel, and religious commanders, all guided by a recognizable countenance who proceeded at their position. Judas proceeded with intention through the grove roots he recognized so thoroughly. His spirit impacted against his skeletal structure like a confined avian creature, each impact reminding him of the selection he had executed. The 30 silver coins seemed oppressive in his recollection, their pressure converting from anticipation to burden with each movement toward his teacher. The strategy appeared uncomplicated sufficiently. In the obscurity, with numerous individuals' attendants, the sentries required an unmistakable indication to recognize their target. Jesus resembled any additional Jewish instructor. No coronation symbol, No royal garments, no distinguishing characteristics that would position him separately in the oscillating illumination source radiance. An embrace would resolve this difficulty. A customary greeting between instructor and student that would materialize ordinary while providing a more obscure intention. As the assembly neared, Jesus advanced forward to encounter them. His disciples awakened from their rest, bewilderment inscribed across their countenances as they attempted to comprehend what was transpiring. The tranquil evening had converted into something completely distinct, and they discovered themselves projected into a scene they had never envisioned. "Greetings, instructor," Judas stated, his expression carrying across the grove atmosphere. The statements resonated ordinary, even comfortable, yet they conveyed the pressure of betrayal. He neared Jesus with the simple familiarity of 3 years of companionship, 3 years of distributed gatherings, and extended conversations and silent instants of instruction. Then materialized the embrace. Judas inclined forward and positioned his oral contact to Jesus' facial side, a motion that had transferred between them innumerable occasions previously. Yet this embrace was distinct. It conveyed the toxin of betrayal, the acrid sensation of 30 silver coins, the pressure of a choice that would resonate through perpetuity. Jesus obtained the embrace without retreating. "Companion," he stated silently, his expression carrying both melancholy and reception. "Accomplish what you arrived to accomplish." The term companion suspended in the atmosphere between them, neither charge nor approval, yet something considerably more intricate, an acknowledgement of what had existed and what was currently forfeited. The instant extended like a suspended respiration. For a moment, the grove maintained its tranquility. Then disorder materialized as the sentries proceeded forward, their grasps extending for Jesus. The disciples conclusively comprehended what was transpiring, and their bewilderment converted into alarm and fury. Peter, consistently rapid to function, extracted his blade and oscillated at the proximate sentry. The edge contacted Malchus, the chief priest's attendant, separating his auditory organ. Essence flowed in the illumination source radiance, and the assembly retreated, abruptly conscious that these uncomplicated fishermen might not relinquish their teacher without resistance. Yet Jesus advanced between his disciples and the sentries, his expression penetrating through the disorder. "Position your blade back in its location," he communicated to Peter, "for all who extract the blade will terminate by the blade." Then, in a motion that astonished everyone in attendance, Jesus contacted Malchus's injured auditory organ and restored it completely. The flowing terminated, the auditory organ reinstated, the aggression reversed by a gesture of sympathy. The assembly positioned themselves astounded. Even in his detention, Jesus persisted in restoring instead of injuring. The opposition between his gestures and theirs transformed stark in the oscillating illumination source radiance. They had arrived with blades and implements to detain a teacher who restored his adversaries. "Am I guiding an uprising," Jesus inquired the assembly, "that you have materialized with blades and implements to obtain me? Each sundown I positioned in the temple areas, instructing, and you did not detain me there. Yet this constitutes your hour when obscurity administers." His statements conveyed both opposition and relinquishment, interrogating their approaches while receiving their result. The sentries proceeded forward again, more thoughtfully this occasion. They secured Jesus' grasps with coarse cordage, the identical grasps that had approved offspring and restored the afflicted. As they guided him distant, the disciples dispersed into the obscurity, their bravery disappointing them, confronting armed resistance. Judas observed from the darkness as his teacher was guided distant. The embrace still ignited on his oral contact, its closeness now converted into something horrible. He had anticipated experiencing alleviation, possibly even contentment, yet instead discovered solely an intensifying vacancy in his being. The silver currency appeared to ridicule him now, their pressure inadequate to equilibrate the pressure of what he had accomplished. The grove descended silent again as the assembly vanished into the evening. Solely the olive vegetation maintained, their ancient branches having observed another instant of human betrayal. The foliage persisted in their soft sound, indifferent to the performance that had recently transpired beneath their protection. Jesus proceeded between his captives, his movements unwavering regardless of the connections on his forearms. Behind him, the Gethsemane grove maintained its confidences, the supplications that had been communicated, the moisture that had been distributed, the embrace that had transformed everything. Ahead extended ridicule and anguish, yet, additionally, the completion of an affection that would not be discouraged. The traitor's embrace had accomplished its labor. The detention was finalized. Yet, in the distorted contradiction of that obscure evening, the gesture intended to annihilate would transform into the basis of anticipation for millions still to materialize. Consequences. The evening disintegrates. The illumination source procession twisted through Jerusalem's confined passages like a flame serpent, conveying Jesus toward the chief priest's residence. Behind them, the Gethsemane grove positioned vacant, its ancient olive vegetation returning to their silent observation. The disciples had dispersed in the obscurity, their bravery evaporating like dawn moisture under the severe actuality of armed sentries and brutal control. Judas accompanied at a separation, his spirit oppressive with the pressure of what he had initiated. The 30 silver coins no longer appeared like compensation for contributions provided. They seemed more like essence, currency, igniting in his recollection with each movement he executed through the resting metropolis. The embrace still remained on his oral contact, converted from a motion of greeting into something considerably more threatening. The chief priest's courtyard resonated with movement, regardless of the advanced hour. Attendants accelerated about with lamps and illumination sources, their countenances radiant with stimulation and inquisitiveness. Information had distributed rapidly through the religious hierarchy. The troublesome instructor from Nazareth had conclusively been obtained. The individual who had opposed their control, who had expelled merchants from the temple, who had communicated against their customs, was currently secured and powerless. Jesus, positioned in the focal point of the courtyard, his grasp secured behind his dorsal surface, encircled by sentries who appeared nearly apprehensive to contact him. Even in imprisonment, something regarding his attendance rendered hardened military personnel retreat marginally. His vision, peaceful and unwavering, examined the scene without anxiety or resentment. He materialized more resembling a monarch maintaining administration than a captive anticipating assessment. The religious commanders commenced to assemble, their garments producing sounds in the frigid evening atmosphere. These were the identical individuals who had organized his detention, who had compensated Judas his silver currency, who had anticipated the correct instant to function. Now their instant had materialized, and they proceeded with the assurance of pursuers who had conclusively restricted their objective. Judas located himself where he could observe the transactions without being perceived. Portion of him anticipated witnessing Jesus evade to observe another phenomenon that would reverse the betrayal. Yet another portion of him, the portion that had intensified, frustrated with Jesus' refusal to obtain political authority, desired to witness what would transpire when the religious commanders confronted their captive. The interrogation commenced almost instantly. Chief priest Caiaphas, his countenance severe in the oscillating illumination source radiance, solicited responses regarding Jesus' instructions and his disciples. Yet Jesus maintained primarily silent, his answers measured and thoughtful. When he did communicate, his statements conveyed the identical control that had astounded assemblies in the temple areas. Observers advanced forward, their testimonies contradicting each other in their enthusiasm to satisfy the religious commanders. Several professed Jesus had menaced to annihilate the temple. Additional individuals maintained he had professed to constitute the Messiah, yet their accounts didn't coordinate, and their transparent enthusiasm for condemnation rendered their statements doubtful even to those who desired to accept them. As the hours transferred, Judas observed his teacher maintain his worthiness regardless of the ridicule and charges. No phenomenon materialized to rescue him. No celestial beings descended from the heavens. No abrupt disclosure converted the spirits of his charges. Instead, Jesus tolerated their interrogations with the identical patience he had demonstrated to authentic seekers and aggressive critics similarly. The awareness commenced to materialize on Judas like a gradual, horrible sunrise. This was genuinely transpiring. The individual he had accompanied for 3 years, the teacher who had communicated regarding affection and pardon, was advancing to be condemned by the identical religious commanders who professed to provide God. The silver currency had acquired not merely a detention, yet a route toward termination. In the courtyard section, Peter heated himself beside a flame, attempting to integrate with the attendants and sentries. 3 occasions, individuals acknowledged him as one among Jesus' disciples. 3 occasions, he rejected, recognizing his teacher. The third rejection materialized with maledictions and declarations, his expression carrying across the courtyard in the quietness preceding dawn. At that instant, Jesus rotated and gazed directly at Peter. Their visions connected across the populated courtyard, and in that examination, Peter perceived not condemnation, yet significant melancholy. The avian creature produced sound, its summons resonating against the stone barriers, and Peter recollected Jesus' forecast. He escaped into the evening, lamenting intensely. Judas observed Peter's exit with intensifying horror. If Peter, the most audacious among the disciples, had rejected Jesus, what anticipation persisted? The remaining disciples had dispersed like foliage in a tempest. The assemblies that had received Jesus into Jerusalem were nowhere to be located. The teacher who had appeared so influential, now positioned alone, relinquished by everyone aside from his captors. The interrogation persisted as dawn neared. Jesus' quietness frustrated his interrogators, yet it additionally disclosed something significant. He was not protecting himself, because he had previously received what was materializing. The supplications in Gethsemane had resolved the issue. This was not an evaluation he intended to succeed through intelligent arguments or appeals to fairness. As the atmosphere commenced to illuminate, the religious commanders executed their choice. Jesus would be transferred to the Roman powers for termination. The charge would constitute professing to constitute a monarch, a governmental transgression that would guarantee rapid and brutal punishment. They had accomplished their objective. The troublesome teacher would be silenced perpetually. Yet, even as they honored their achievement, something was incorrect. The evening had not transpired as anyone anticipated. Jesus had not appealed for compassion or proposed to negotiate. His adherents had not organized a rescue. The theatrical confrontation they had envisioned had transformed into something completely distinct, a silent demonstration of worthiness confronting unfairness. Judas experienced the pressure of awareness, establishing on his frame like an oppressive covering.